Sure. So since Chuck is an official, it is literally just 2:15, so we'll get rolling here. Our next presenter is Ross Krause. He's the CEO of AthleteReg, which most of you know as the home of Bike Reg and our registration partner. Ross is a longtime endurance athlete and in his own words, a one-time aspiring professional road racer. But now with his business, he's now focused on helping event organizers and athletes. And like many of us in the industry, spends more time talking about bikes than actually riding them. So Ross is going to be talking about cycling registration trends, what he's been seeing on the back end, event modifications that folks have been going through, and also some tools that Bike Reg has developed during this time of the pandemic. So Ross, all yours.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for having me on for this. I'm slated for an hour. Hopefully there's something useful in here. If not, I will fill it with bad jokes. I'm good at those too. But yeah, so let's see where to begin. I feel like with a lot of things, we're going to have all the trends and takeaways and lessons figured out just as this thing is wrapping up. But I will say that from what we've seen as far as trends and events and conversations with directors, people have a much better handle on how to operate events right now than when we were back in the middle of last summer and everyone was kind of scratching their head trying to figure out how on earth do we make this work. I remember coming in to talk, I think it was it June maybe, and we were hearing from the event director. Unfortunately, I'm not remembering his name, in Tennessee, going over the case study of how the mountain bike race was run there. And some people were able to adapt based on what their event type is and their venue pretty quickly. There's other challenges with the way your event needs to operate. But anyways, I'm already off script and I'm only on the first slide. So this is how an hour gets filled up, I guess. I wondered. Yeah, so anyways, thanks for having me. I'm here to talk about like just what we've seen in trends, just to give an indication of everything from where do we think this is turning around and how quickly are we seeing like health in the sport returning from participation numbers and event director confidence, to which types of events are actually seeing registrations, which types of events are being set up, and maybe why is that? What can we learn from that? And can it maybe help folks put on safe events if they're still trying to figure out how to do that for 2021? So probably more questions will come out of this, which is a good thing, and some good conversations. So yeah, let's go to the next slide if you don't mind, Chuck. So general trends, let's see. At a high level, we're definitely seeing a real rebound. The fall, as everyone knows, as numbers were increasing, got increasingly rougher as far as what the prospect was for events. December in particular being very quiet, the inability to run nationals safely, which in my opinion was absolutely the right call. There wasn't much of a season by the end, which was tough to see for everyone involved in the sport. But since then, we've seen a lot of, I guess, what we call consumer confidence. We track a few different things here day to day, everything from number of events being created, where those events are, what types they are, kind of comparing numbers in registrations to this exact time last year, and how is that progressing and in which types of events. So I'll share some of those takeaways. But the short story here is that the rebound is real. There's a lot of demand, as we've said, and everyone's trying to figure out how to capitalize on that. There's a lot of demand, and there's also a lot of confidence from event directors, with the caveat of depending on when their event is. If you've got February, March, April event, things are a bit dicier. People are still moving those dates around, waiting to make a decision, depending on where they are in the country and what the regulations are. But what we're seeing for the types of cycling events that are receiving registrations in January and February, they are often, but not always, events a bit later in the year that are maybe destination events, marquee events, the ones you circle on your calendar. And those, man, people are just desperate to get out and do them. So there's a lot of people signing up. And I would say for the most part, from what we've seen in the data on what people are putting on the pages and the conversations we've had with these directors, people are planning for how to operate their event in a modified way should they need to, or if they do need to from day one. And I'll share a bit of that as well. As far as what we're seeing in trends at the event level, if you want to jump to the next slide, I'll share a bit of that. So I know there's a lot of pieces on this pie here. It's not how I would cut a pie, but this is what it's looking like right now. This is an indication of what events have been created so far on our platform with an event date in 2021. And with the exception of a couple of things I'll point out, it's actually pretty closely aligned with the type of split we usually see, excluding cyclocross, because we just haven't hit that time of year. Things of note that stood out to us that were kind of outliers, and I'll do a bit of a comparison on registration flow after this that I think is a bit more telling. But time trials, a little bit more. Virtual is a whole category that didn't even exist this time last year that we're still seeing events go to right away or pivot to if they need to, where you can do, it's a whole range of things you can do with virtual, and I'm happy to discuss that and answer questions on that later if we have the time. But everything from like challenge style events, I know USS Cycling has been running some of those, to actual like virtual versions of the event where you go ride a similar course, or you go ride on the course and time it yourself, things like that. And I already see a question here. I can talk about this. Yeah, this is a great question, and one I glossed over here, but this other category is kind of a big slice of the pie. That includes things like track events, hill climbs. What else do we have in here that I don't have listed right now? On this one, I actually put Grand Fondos in here just because it was a smaller piece of the pie at the time of creation. So anything that was basically a few percent of less kind of got put into other, where we just didn't quite have enough detail to get it onto the chart here, which is no offense to any of those. Interestingly, usually this time last year, we would see more track events and some of these others. So we're seeing a bit more on the camp side, the virtual side. Basically, this quadrant in your upper left here is usually not that strong. Some time trials set a slightly greater share right now than normal for reasons that are probably self-explanatory as far as the safety of the event. We're seeing club membership action, which I think is a good sign for a general interest in health of the sport in the long run, but I know it doesn't, ease any concerns of those of you still trying to figure out how to put on the event, but it is a good sign in the long run. Virtual, I mentioned, and camps too. I think for camps that are done, that aren't maybe like indoor CompuTrainer type things, that's not so hot right now, but for camps and small clinics and stuff, those are actually quite popular because there's new interest in the sport for beginner type clinics, and two, it's something that people can actually run because they can feel safe about getting a group of 5, 10, 20 together, splitting them up as needed, and running this safely outside. So that's great. But certainly we're not seeing quite as much, quite as heavy on the road side that would be up and running in some regions of the country by now, certainly. What else on that one? So that's some of the kind of the leading indicators we try to look at about like which events are being created. And to my first point on the last slide of, is there a rebound? We're also looking at how many are set up each week, and that continues to increase each week and far surpass any week we had post-COVID last year. So we're really seeing a great rebound for the future as far as confidence in putting on the events, and then also in registrations too, which we'll get to in the next slide. Chuck, do you want to skip to the next one for me? Oh, and I've got another one here. Let me see if I can give a sense on this. So how many total events? I was looking at events we probably got somewhere in the range of, do I have my numbers here? Somewhere in the range of around 1,500 events set up that I'm sampling right there on Bike Reg. And when I get into these ones here where I'm looking at actual registrations, I've cut out any events that obviously don't have any registrations yet or anything that has fewer than 10 registrations. So that definitely reduces the number to probably about half. A good half of the events that are currently set up are things that are sitting there kind of waiting for the future that are either not open or don't have the registrations yet because they're a bit later in the year. So, it remains to be seen how those pan out, but it is an indication of people's intent and what the event type interest is there. So this year, again, lots of labels here, but trying to look at a very similar sampling of events to the last slide. I thought this was telling. I looked at what we've done for registrations to date from January 1st through, I think this report ran through yesterday. On the left here, we've got what did we do in that early portion of 2020? What share went to each event type? And again, barring cyclocross that usually pops in later in the year and some other things that shift this a bit, it's very much representative of the first half of the year in a normal year. This was obviously all before people understood the scope of what was going to happen last year. So you can see a really large share towards road, gravel, recreational, and off-road, and a much smaller piece here towards not even on the radar. I had to put into other because it was so small, are some of the other things that we see in 2021 and some of the other things on the previous slide, such as virtual events that didn't exist, and time trials, were close to none at that point as far as relative to the rest of the scale of the events here. So when we skip over here to 2021, I mean, what are some of the obvious takeaways? If this were a classroom, we'd go around, but I mean, it's pretty clear. Sorry, I've spent too much time watching second grade virtual classroom at my house. So I apologize if I start bringing out any fun activities and movement breaks. So 2021, the events that are kind of eating up road racing, to be clear here, off-road, gravel, off-road and gravel for the most part. And then, we've got some things that have shifted into, like I said, a bit more on the club membership side, which is interesting. And the virtual and the camp are some small chunks there too. And I think there's two things happening here. Again, this is reading into the data a bit. Maybe someone else has a different take, but based on kind of what we've seen in some conversations, I think one, the growth of gravel is real. We could have a whole talk on that still. There's a lot of hype and interest around that. And while there's still the usual, I guess, financial and time and equipment barrier to entry that exists in the rest of cycling, for some people that are getting into the sport a bit later, but still have like kind of a competitive itch, this is maybe something that suits them because there's that adventure built in. So we're seeing more new events like that, and also people willing to commit to those events as destination events. Related to that, and I would say definitely applies also to off-road and is a little bit harder to parlay into road racing, mass start road racing, and also like maybe mass start festival like recreational events or charitable events, is the fact that these events can be modified a bit as far as how they're handling things like wave starts without losing some of the same feel that they're used to in competition. I'm not a seasoned mountain bike or gravel race director, but I think we probably all know some of the ways those events can typically run, especially in the off-road world, where we're usually going by categories of ability, age groups, and things of that nature. And it's not the same as a road race where it's going to be packed up for as long. So you can start in different waves and still have a very similar feeling event. I think the modifications are a bit easier to do that way and still handle a large number of people overall throughout the day. With gravel, it's kind of all across the board. I kind of feel like it's still the Wild West in a way, where people are finding their feet in how these events operate. There are some events that are, running a really large event. Are they all taking the right precautions? I think most are putting out there what they're doing. It's up to everyone to decide, I guess, how they're being run and if it's safe or not. I mean, some events have actually already, one marquee gravel event I know already made the switch to virtual because they're early in the season and they felt like they just couldn't have the same experience and the same festive experience that they wanted. For those that feel like they can maybe avoid that or their event isn't known for that, I think there is absolutely an opportunity that some of these directors are seizing and embracing to create things like open start times where you can start with a small group up to a maximum size during a specific window, things like that. So not exactly self-timed per se, but more go at your own time, and then it's going to be based on your chip time or something if it's even competitive. And there's a question here.
Couple questions came up. Malcolm's asking, are crits included in road race? And then is off-road basically all the different mountain bike disciplines?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, criterium racing is included in road racing in this graph here. So that's going to be basically what we consider most of your like sanctioned events, or unsanctioned but traditional road and criterium style racing. That's going to be categorized, and all of the things that we're used to seeing there. And off-road does comprise all sorts of different off-road events. A lot of it is like, there's certainly competitive cross-country in there, but there's also downhill. There will be enduro. So there's definitely a lot of nuance in this, and it'd be interesting to dig into any one of these categories to figure out which one maybe has the best chance of success or seeing the greatest numbers. And there's definitely a ton of variables, but maybe some are better suited to it. Obviously, running something like the USA Cycling Mountain Bike Nationals with tons and tons of people traveling to it, whole different ball of wax than like a smaller local mountain bike race or an enduro or something like this, where you can spread people out differently. Question on club membership as well. Yeah, these are all great questions. So I'm gonna handle these as I see them come in. I think we've got the time to go through them. So club membership is going to be, we do have like a lot of clubs, like both USA Cycling Sanction clubs and other clubs that use us for membership and merchandise sales and things of that nature. So we're seeing that. But interestingly, I think some of the growth there is also because we see that category used with things like youth racing programs, like here in New England. By the way, I'm in New England, and give any more background on myself. I'm in Western Massachusetts. It's snowing outside right now. So we have up here, there's NESCA, which is the New England High School Cycling Association. And they saw actually great numbers last year. Most of those leagues ran small practices, and even some of the races themselves were able to happen. I can't speak to the details of their events, but I'd say that does fall under the classification of club memberships as well, and can drive some of those numbers. Included in recreational, that's a good question. So these are all like self-identifying categories. So, if we see something that's a standout that we know belongs somewhere else, we can help people guide them towards that. But with recreational, it's typically, I'm trying to think of some example events that would fit into that, but it's going to be often maybe it's a mass start ride, but it's something that doesn't define itself by the competitive nature, like a Grand Fondo or a gravel grinder or a road race would, but it's still out on the open roads. So like the Hotter than Hell 100 in Texas, there are some competitive aspects to it, but they also consider themselves a recreational event, first and foremost, because for a lot of people, it's about the experience. The definitions are hard sometimes, because I think some of it doesn't always accurately classify how people approach these events, but that's the type of event that's usually in there. Or like a fundraising ride that fundraises for a local or national charity, things like that. Yeah, that's actually another great question came in. Thanks, Jed, on the participant age data. So I was actually going to bring that up in the next slide, but I'll just talk about it here in case there's more questions on this. And there's a couple other quick points I wanted to touch on. I spent some time, the last time I spoke here with USA Cycling, and we looked at trends last summer to see like what's changed since COVID hit. We were looking to see if there was a difference in age and gender distribution across events, across all events, or across different event types, if people were registering earlier or later. And there's really no significant difference. And that's still the same thing I'm seeing. It's like just a smaller number of kind of the same people. I think within subsets, it's a little bit different. Like gravel has a little bit of a different gender distribution. There's certainly not equity, but there's a greater percentage of women riders in gravel than there is in, say, traditional road racing. There are some things like that exist, but overall, we didn't see any notable differences between 2020 and 2021. But at the higher level of that stuff, that'd be an interesting thing to dig into. I don't have it right in front of me around what we're seeing, but I'd be happy to share some of those trends. And I'm gonna take a note of that so I don't forget. So that could be an interesting thing just to dig into. Because that's often been one of the recommendations too that we've had in some of our email tools that we have, is like, how can you try to market to a specific group if you're trying to increase participation? Like kind of know your data, know where it stands against like a national average, and if you want to try to shift it in one direction or the other, can you provide incentives to specific groups within your data? So we've kind of created some tools so you can segment people that way and target them with different emails and offers if you want to. Yes, thanks for the question. Other questions on this data? Otherwise, those are kind of the takeaways here. It is changing a bit. And here's where I was just going to mention them: the locations, demographics, timing. As I just mentioned. Oh, perfect. I didn't know I had other. Are those my bullet points on that one? Maybe they're not. So on demographics and timing, we're not really seeing much of a difference right now. Traditionally, this time of year, it's early in the year. People are registering for things very far in advance. That's not changing much. We're seeing fewer registrations for things in the near term, just because some of those near term events just simply aren't happening. You know, there's not a full calendar of events that are happening in February and March right now anywhere in the country. You know, usually we're seeing stuff in different warmer regions, and then even in March, even in the colder regions, and we're just not seeing that right now. So in that sense, the timing has changed. As far as locations, I also dug into different states to see if I could share some trends on where we're seeing events. And honestly, there was no big takeaway there. It seems to be that you're at the whim of what things look like in your state and what the policies are and what the general interest and appetite for putting on events that draw a number of people are. And that's very different from state to state and region to region. Again, even here in New England, there's some pretty stark differences in how states approached events and have approached this entire thing. I'll also mention another resource while I'm here. So there was just over the weekend, I know was the NEBRA, the New England Bicycle Racing Association meeting was just over this past weekend. If you look it up, they recorded their session on YouTube, and there's some interesting takeaways. I don't have the link here, but if you looked on YouTube for New England Bicycle Racing Association, you would find that, I'm sure. And they had a couple of people speak from that were able to successfully put on events in Connecticut and as well as New Hampshire. And honestly, I think there's people on this call that could speak to it better than I could, that were there firsthand and talking through that. But you know, events successfully ran, and then in Massachusetts, where we are, it was, you know, much quieter. I think it's just a matter of which directors are where, how can they handle it, what are their usual venues, you know, is it much easier to secure a private venue and to work with them on what they require for insurance and accommodations, but still be within the rules, whereas many public spaces were just like hands off of everything, understandably in a lot of ways, but that makes it difficult to promote an event. Also just different rules. I'll cite some events in New Hampshire in a bit too, and how they, some of the folks putting on events actually really works directly with the administration up there, which I think is still an option through this whole year, to try to do that, to work with what the phases can be, how you can safely run events. I'm not qualified to say what makes a safe event, but I think there's a lot of consensus around how it is possible to run relatively safe, low risk events outside if you do the right things and don't try to do too much. So I think if there are people willing to work on that with their state and local authorities to try to work on how that can work and really own that process, I think there's a lot that's possible. And I'll get to some of those takeaways here in a bit. So that is my giant asterisk on locations, which is where we're seeing events often has little to do with like if that's a lasting trend, or if it's just this is where events can happen, or there are people pushing events to later in the year that think they're going to happen. So that's my takeaway on that. Let's jump into the next slide, Chuck. So to that end, and I know there's going to be some more talk on this tomorrow, probably more than I can say this, since I can't give the firsthand examples myself, but I will touch on this. I think if I saw the agenda right, it sounds like Lance and Joan and Tobin are going to be speaking to the events that they ran and had success running, and probably some challenges they can share as well. So I think that'll be great to hear. So I'll just touch on what we've been able to kind of pull together anecdotally and talking to some folks of what types of events are happening. It's like I covered a lot of this in those pie charts around the types of events that are having some success and why. But even looking back at last year, there were criteriums happening. There were training races happening. There were mountain bike races happening. There was like a full cyclocross season in some regions. And I think it was just a matter of like, could people follow protocol? Were some event directors willing to just take on that added added investment of doing that, whether the investment be just time or actual, financial resources. I think it depends on what you need to do. So what's being modified and considered, and again, I don't want to drive this point home for too long, because I think it's going to be discussed even more tomorrow, and it's been discussed a lot, but obviously it's looking at what the local regulations are and working around that and collecting screening information if you need to, all of that stuff. And again, I'm not an expert on that, but that's what we're hearing is like, it's all about controlling the pre and post environment, controlling your numbers and controlling the numbers of people heading out on the road or trail at the same time. So if you think you can envision doing that in some way, then like that's definitely worth exploring. Yeah, let's jump to the next one real quick, and I've got more to say on this that I think we'll touch on here. So I pulled this not because it's like, oh, hey, here's your marquee example, but I thought this was an interesting graphic and an example that of how someone's advertising, how they're going to modify their events. This is the Grand Fondo National Series, and they put out kind of a whole safety guide, and this is one piece of it where they're saying, look, if by the time that your event rolls around in your state that we're going to do, we're going to see where the risk stands. I don't know exactly what the metrics are going to be in each state. Maybe they'll work with the local authorities. I'm not privy to those details, but I like this concept. If you've got a way to think through this of, look, on the one hand, if we got low risk, we're going to do our traditional event. It's mass start. It's all the usual things. As risk increases, we've been able to work with the venue and what we're doing to either modify start times, so you have like a socially distanced start and we're still timing segments, or we've got this venue for the weekend, which I'm sure some people are thinking, oh, I can't do that with mine. So I get that. But in this case, it's an interesting solution. And it's like, hey, there's going to be some support there and you've got 2 days to go out and do it. And the final one is like, this is self-supported. Here's the course, here's the map. So if you can get to the region and there's not travel restrictions, you can do that. And then during this whole thing, there's a virtual option. That's been one of our kind of big pitches, I guess, which depending on how your event works, can work for you, is like, think about how you can run your event in a modified fashion and think about hybrid, where can you offer an option that people can do on their own on site or on their own off site to supplement that if they still want to be part of the experience. And that's obviously highly dependent on your willingness to put some time into thinking through how that works and what you need to do to collect that information. And also on what style event it is. If your event really is, if the heart of it is starting, 3,000 people at the same time, or 100 people, 150 people at the same time in tight groups all the time, and that's simply not allowed, it might be hard for you to think about how to have someone recreate that at home. But there are ways to think through this for certain events, or if you're willing to be flexible in that. So that's one of the things we're seeing, is people trying to just be very clear about what the decision-making matrix is, about how they'll modify their event, and also what that looks like to give people confidence in doing that. So can we skip to the next one? I've got another example here. So in other sports, we're seeing this too. Things I have up here is in New Hampshire, there's a partner we work with on the running side, Millennium Running, and they were quick to adapt to this. They were fortunate in that they control a lot of the resources they need to do this. They have the timing equipment as well as being an event management company. So I think with the right partners, it's possible to do this. Where with them, what they did is they quickly modified their events to allow for kind of a hybrid functionality, where you can go run this course here over a period of days or weeks, and we're going to consolidate times, or you can submit a time from home and still be part of it, and we'll ship you your medal and things like that. And then they did time trial formats where they basically like do 2-up time trial starts like every 10 seconds. So people actually got really into that because they had like, a live board up there, like announcing the names and people going out. So again, I realize this is running and it's not the same as cycling, and it might not be the same thing that you can do in your event, but think through the logistics of your venue, think through what the goals are of how you're trying to build your community, and maybe think about if there's a way that you can modify to get those smaller groups out there. I thought they did a really good job at pivoting to that. They also ran virtual challenges throughout the year to engage their client base and feel like they could still do something even if they had travel restrictions. So a lot of different solutions. It just looked like a different year for them for sure. Below that is actually a picture of some Nordic ski racing that's happening. Again, this is just the concept of like this spread out time trial start format. Another thing I don't have a clip up here for, but another thing we saw was with USSA, the United States Ski and Snowboard Association, in some different regions. They've actually matched, or at least come close to matching, their normal racing numbers in some of their alpine racing leagues. And they did this by intentionally increasing the number of events that they did at different locations, but decreasing the number of people at those. So they really tried to make it a more local race season at the local mountains, rather than saying, here's the smaller number of events with more people and it's a destination, because I know in some cases there are interstate travel restrictions and things like that. So I thought that was an interesting solution from them at the scale that they're at. They were able to do that. What else are we seeing here in event modifications? I think the big thing is you've got a venue for that has enough space and enough time to work with, you can get creative. If you're limited on those, it definitely does get more challenging. Give me 1 second here to make sure I'm not forgetting something crucial here. And I guess let's jump into the next one, unless there's questions on those. So something I mentioned before, and I brought it up last summer in talking here and with other folks, is like, it's really a big thing we've seen is like people are being very clear with their policies now, so they don't get into hot water as far as the safety goes, or also even just with the reputation with their participants. So they're being very clear about setting out what their safety guidelines are, in some cases making people agree to those in the form of another waiver or question. So they can cite that and say, look, you said it was going to be just you coming to the venue. We're not allowing family here to watch, like this is the deal. Like you come, you check in, contactless check in, you do this, you do that, really spelling out what it's going to be for two reasons. Both to cover themselves if they need to have a difficult conversation with someone, which I've heard of, very few, if any. But also to make it very clear, make people feel like, hey, this is safe. This doesn't feel that different to me than like going out to an appointment where I need to agree to these things before I step foot inside the door. And then I'm careful when I'm there. People are also being clear about what format changes might come to the event and when those decisions will be made. And then finally, if they do or do not have a refund policy, and if that's going to involve like, hey, we'll give you literally a financial refund back to your credit card, or issuing a credit to future events, or if they're going to let people defer if they need to move the entire event. Those are all options. And we've seen all of those. I just saw this next question. I'm smiling because I'm going to get to that. Thank you, Matt. So we've seen all of these things work really well, and we've seen some of them work not well only when people didn't communicate them very well and people were surprised and they felt like it was a bait and switch. So I think as long as you communicate that there's potentially changes and you say here will be the range of options available to you, you're going to secure more registrations that way, which is going to let you more confidently proceed with your event, thinking that you're going to hit that budget you need to do it. So that's what we're seeing working. And again, it's like communicate is the big thing. So yeah, Matt had a question here on how hard is it to add a COVID waiver to the site? I'm so glad you asked that. It's almost like this is perfect. It's as if I set you up for this, but I didn't. So I was going to get to that. I think that might even be my next slide. Can we skip to the next slide and see? I should remember since I made these. We didn't quite, but I'm going to get there. We've got a cool COVID waiver tool that I think is going to be super handy. That's going to let you collect the type of data you need. So I'll get there. So still on the data piece to collect, and that will lead in nicely into thinking about waiver type stuff you need to do. I think it's really important just to make sure you're on top of any local and federal guidelines around like what type of information might be requested of you to like prove that you're running an event of the right size. I have not heard of a single case where like any of this stuff has been asked for or it's been an issue, but like I know people are trying to be on top of this. So again, it's thinking about what agreements do you need to get? I'm not a lawyer. I don't even like lawyer shows, but think through that, talk to someone that knows that stuff, talk to USA Cycling, talk to your local health board, figure out what types of questions you need to ask and how you need to secure those. And just know that it's easy to collect that data and have a record of that. Especially with the waivers, we do things like our standard waiver, if you use it, is going to collect things like their initials, their checkbox agreement, IP address, and actually record the text of the waiver at the exact time they agreed to it, should you make modifications to it later. Big thanks actually to USA Cycling and working with us in our partnership around making a really robust waiver solution. That and other governing bodies we worked with provides a really good model for just how to make that as secure as possible while being an online waiver so that you can have confidence in the data you're collecting. So yeah, and I've got another question here from Mark around event day registration check-in in terms of contact lists. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I don't have a slide on that, but that'll tie in nicely here. So can we jump to the next one here? So we did just recently add a new waiver option here. So it's one thing to collect agreement from people that they understand what the policies are and they're going to be careful when they register, but that could be anywhere from 6 months to 2 days before your event and might not really be relevant by the time they arrive. So much like most of us are used to, if you've had to go to any sort of appointment or anything, or have a kid going to a camp or going to school or something, it's pretty normal these days to have to complete something online or in person where you answer 5 to 10 questions about symptoms, exposure, all of those things that we're used to being asked now. So what we did was, short of providing you the text, because that's not really our place to do that, and it's definitely very event and region specific, what we did is we built a new waiver tool. So if you're in your event on our site and you go over into your event setup menu, we've got something there called the COVID-19 waiver, to make it very obvious what it is. And as you can see here, it's a date restricted waiver. So what this is, creates a new waiver that you can choose a date and time that this will basically appear. And that may even be after your registration closes and people have already signed up. But then what you can do from there is it can trigger an automatic email out to your participant base to say, here's this new waiver you need to agree to. And it'll be whatever protocol questions you need to ask are in that waiver, and people will agree, and you'll get a record of the date, time, initials, IP address, all that stuff of that agreement. If we can skip to the next slide, you'll actually see, I'm not going to run through what to click, but it shows you what type of flexibility you have. So you create this waiver, you can give it your own title, you can call it your whatever health board COVID-19 waiver or your event name. You can choose if it applies to everyone in every single category. And then you choose what time you want this to actually go into effect. What time will it appear? And what time is this going to disappear that you don't want people to be able to agree to it any longer, because you'll already need that agreement or something, should you need to put an expiration on that. And then you can set it up to automatically email your participants as soon as that becomes active. So for you, it's like, all right, I need to know within 48 hours of the event that people are, safe, don't have these symptoms, aren't going to do this, aren't going to do that. Or even later in the year here, it could be, if your event needs to say, I understand that I will need to produce evidence of a negative test result, or even that I'm vaccinated. Those things are coming. That might seem a ways off, but I think that type of stuff is coming. You can even have this pop up there. So as soon as this shows up Friday at 8 a.m., everyone can get that email right then, and it'll say, you got this new waiver to agree to. You've got this, whatever the event the title of the waiver is, so they know that there's a call to action. That actually ties in nicely, Mark, to your question on the check-in, because we do have a check-in tool that's also there in our event tools. And what that lets you do is basically pull up on any device. It's just your regular event director login. It's not a separate app, though you can also grant invitational access to volunteers for them to pull it up on their phone to check people in. And what it does is basically you can check people in via QR code if you want to get that close, or they can just tell you their name from a distance and you search them up, and then you can indicate that they're checked in. And better yet, with this, it'll also list out any waivers that they have that are outstanding that they did not agree to, whether that be this one or a different waiver you had where someone was signing up a minor and it was sent to them to agree to, but they haven't actually agreed to it yet. You'll see that when you check them in. So you can say, hey, actually, I need you to agree to these waivers, because depending on when you send this out, some percentage of people are not going to open their email and do this the night before. They're not going to see it. So what that lets you do is see that they haven't done it. You can check them in on your device. They don't need to touch it. And you can also have a link straight from there that says, email this person another link to their waiver. So, I'm there, and Mark, you're in line, standing exactly 6 feet away from me. And I see that you didn't agree to it. I'm going to say, hey, you didn't agree to this. I need to know you did. Hit the link. Assuming you have a phone or some way to check this, you'll get that email, and then you can agree to it right there, and I'll be able to refresh and see that you've agreed to the waiver, and we're all contactless check in and everyone's agreed. So we think that'll be pretty useful for events that want to do this and need just an easy way to track this, and don't want to create their own mess of Google Sheets and whatever other way you want to do this. And from there, I'd say as people get this into the wild, and if they've got things for their events or they're hearing from their local boards, this is where my software engineers want to strangle me, because it's like, we want to make changes for you. But no, honestly, we want to hear from people. And it's like, actually, if we're hearing from a number of people that there's some other format that they need data in, or some other use case here that's common that we didn't anticipate, we're all for that. Like, we want to see the events happen this year. We all do. So we think this will be a really great start and should cover most cases from the input we got. So give it a shot and let us know if you have questions or other ideas. Let's see. Any other questions on that around waivers, check-ins? We just got this out, so I can't tell you how it's working yet. This just came out in the last week, and we're going to get some info on it. But happy to report back. But other people have been using our standard waiver and questions for this type of stuff. And this will just be a little handier with the automatic email and time that it appears.
Ross, this is Chuck. I do want to step in just with one item on this. We had this question come up on our insurance webinar, and I'll point people to that. But USA Cycling did make some tweaks to the assumption of risk of our waiver, which I know you're aware of last year. That is, anytime we can make a change, that's automatically ported to BikeReg and their online waiver. So we didn't specifically call out COVID, and there's some very good reasons we feel for that, but we did add some language about disease in there. And that was done in regards to a lot of discussions with other NGBs and Sports Council. We didn't just, snap our fingers and come up with that. So we feel that is good protection, our standard waiver language. The question did come up from organizers on that call about an additional COVID waiver. We don't think it's necessarily needed as far as a strict waiver, but some communities may be requiring it. And, Ross, I know you're calling this a waiver, but as we've discussed it, this is a great way for you to just, even the final checklist for participants of, are you running a fever? Are you showing signs and symptoms? And you're attesting that you're not. So I think my point would be, for event organizers, don't feel like you have to put some additional legal waiver there. This is a great tool that BikeReg has developed for you to ask specific questions. And the quick example, and we'll go into more detail tomorrow, is, UCI races, there's actually a mandate for a requirement of a negative COVID test 72 hours before some races. And this tool could really be used to remind people of that and remember to turn it in and that type of thing. So kudos to you guys for getting this built out.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome, and thanks for clarifying all that. That's a really good point. And in a way, it's more of your attestation form more so than a waiver. But I get shot down when I put too many words and things. So we called it waiver. But yeah, I think that's a good point, and I'm glad there's also additional language in the standard USA Cycling release as well. So I think people can be pretty well covered in this, and it is really a matter of checking in to see what's required locally for you to do this. This actually reminds me, I'm just gonna go back off on one little tangent. It reminds me of, I was mentioning before around working with local boards of health and stuff like that. The example I used earlier of Millennium Running, they actually worked very closely with the Governor's Council in helping develop where sport and where road races specifically and things like that fell into the kind of their reopening plan. And I know that that kind of close relationship isn't always possible or realistic or easy to have, but where there's opportunity at, whether it be at the state or even more local level, to have those conversations and try to cite some events that have had success and protocols you think you can follow and say, look, we're going to follow these strict guidelines. I think that could be really useful for people. And that's why I think tools like this can help to say, look, here's everything we're doing to collect, just like anyone else would. You know, if you're going to let these things run, let us do this in this safe fashion. And I think, like I said, you're going to hear from some great event directors tomorrow that are probably going to have some insight to like what worked well in their events, more so than I can say firsthand. So, Chuck, do I have anything on the next slide? Let's see here. Hey, look at that. Surprise. That's all I've got. And it did take longer than I thought it would. So like I said, overly verbose. So yeah, thank you. And I'm just got my email up here. If there's other questions on any of this stuff, the tools, the data, something else that you think would be useful that like just did not occur to me to share, I'm all for hearing from you on that. And if there's any other questions right now, or people want to discuss any of this, looks like we have a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, Ross and I talk quite a bit, and we try to share trends we're seeing between organizations, and we asked him on to share what they're seeing. You've heard a little from us. You know, feel free to put in chat any questions for either of us, either organization, or what you're seeing, and happy to answer those. We have a few minutes before our technical closing, and I'll turn over to Tara here in a bit to close us out. So. But it's
well, Chuck, I'd like to reiterate, you know, Ross's data shows that there's healthy interest in racing in 2021. And from my experience with our national championships and our national calendars, there's never been a January and February in which I've received so many emails and phone calls related to national championships and the national calendar events. And those weren't questions of, is the event going to be canceled? It's, what's the schedule? How can I register? I don't want to necessarily be boxed out if there's registration field limits. And so from the seat that I'm sitting in, and we're going to talk more about COVID guidelines and some protocols for folks to follow, but I'm pretty optimistic about this year. And I don't know if that's naive, because there were portions of last year that I felt optimistic about too. But again, I feel like people are very interested in getting out of their houses and participating in something that they really haven't been able to do for the last 9 or 10 months. So just from my ancillary data of phone calls and emails, people are absolutely interested in racing and getting out there for this year.
Thanks, Tara. Any other questions from folks? Ross did a great job of keeping up. His chat went. Ross, I don't think there's anything we're missing at this point. So
I'm looking through. I think we got, at least we're able to touch on everything.
Great.